So yes, this is, I believe our title for today's panel is Intersex, Non-Binary, and the Gender Spectrum. I am Cynthia BrianKate. Let's see, I happen to be one of the vice chairs of the Green Party of Suffolk County on Long Island in New York. I also happen to be, let's see, I'm on the Lavender, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, actually lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and related people caucus, the Women's Caucus, the Forming Disability Caucus, and advisor to the Young Eco-Socialist Caucus. I also have been doing lectures, workshops, and panels on biological sex, gender identity, expression, and sexual orientation topics for about a quarter of a century, and help run stuff for the United States versions of both Intersex Friends and Families and Intersex Campaign for Equality. Actually, DawnMarie, if you could put in there at some point, or maybe later, Intersex Friends and Families has a Facebook group. It's for intersex people, friends, families, lovers, spouses, partners, and such. Intersex Campaign for Equality, IC number 4E, should be, I think it's intersexequality.com. So that's who I am and why the heck I am presenting this. And let me know, besides that, what I should start with. I guess if nothing else, what the heck these topics are. Can folks hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you just fine.
Good. While I've used Zoom for a couple of years now, there's always a question of what it's doing each time. So, okay. I guess I should start with what the heck intersex is. Intersex is the current term, though oddly enough, it was coined in 1917, and in fact, I checked Wikipedia links that apparently is when it was coined to refer to people who are biologically in between what the expected medical, physical definitions of male and female. And this can be by all sorts of sex characteristics. That includes hormones, chromosomes, genitalia, either external and or internal structures, and pretty much any bodily characteristic that falls under being sexually defined. So intersex is more about reproductive and physical biology than gender identity. So they are distinct things. Use that. While non-binary is actually referring to gender identity and expression, which pretty much is all the people who do not feel that the categories of man and woman or the expectations for male and females exactly fit them, their identity, or their life. And it's the gender spectrum because gender actually is a spectrum. Too many stereotypes have the idea that gender is just either male or female, or masculine or feminine, when for so many people it is not exactly the case. I myself happen to be both intersex and a transgender woman, and when people ask me, but how can you be trans if you're intersex, I can either say that one refers to biological sex and the other to gender identity, or I can say that a loving, well-meaning, and clueless family tried raising me to be a boy, and I grew up a woman instead. And intersex, as I said, is a biological reality. And there's also a related one, chimerism. Basically, the word chimera refers to people, twins, triplets, or other multiple fetuses, which merge in utero in some cases to result in the person being born with a composite body. I happen to, and this is the thing, if the siblings involved are fraternal siblings rather than all identical, and they're of different sexes, then you get an intersex chimera. I myself am an intersex chimera. I am in between male and female biologically because I was supposed to be either twins or maybe even triplets had we been able to have been born singly and all survived. Instead, my mom sent home with one of me. And in terms of frequency of this, the research I have access to is nearly 20 years old. Robin Wood's research says that intersex people, according to a nationwide cross-section of people being interviewed and surveyed, as many as nearly 10% of the population, and that's 20-year-old research. As for chimerism, well, the thing is, 1 out of every 8 pregnancies starts out as multiple fetuses. Some get miscarried, some get reabsorbed into the mother, causing what is sometimes called microchimerism, which means that the mother's DNA is actually added to by the fetus she absorbed and can cause some interesting effects that may be noticed physically. And the rest of the situation is that every other case of this, the fetuses merge in order to survive, and you get chimeras. And on that, I can point to the work of Carol Dennis, who is a researcher in this field. I believe she is on Facebook, is where I actually met her. There are actually at least about 46 or 47 different medically recognized types of intersex. And I will say medically recognized because not every person has been medically recognized, even while having a body that's in between. I myself have never been medically certified. However, I've been through 2 distinct puberties. First one when I was told I should expect it, the second one in my 20s. Most people tell me that they can tell I'm intersex with my clothes on, and while I'll keep it PG-13 to say with my clothes off, you would definitely get quite a science lesson. So there are 46 or 47 types that medical science recognizes. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll mention a couple. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia usually results in people who are expected to be female at birth. The genitalia can sometimes be seen as appearing more stereotypically male. There's more body hair, and actually that physical appearance may be factored into some people in ancient Sumeria's definition of the body of the goddess Lilith, because people always were telling myth stories to explain the world around them. So that's one example. 5-alpha reductase is the medical term. It has to do with chromosomes, enzymes, and such. In many Latin cultures, that is actually called hueva doce, eggs at 12, because in Latin culture, that's what a young man refers to his parts as opposed to American, Western, North American culture would call it. And in that case, you get somebody who is assumed to be female at birth, usually raised a girl, and then at puberty, their male genitalia actually manifests by appearing more markedly and noticeably. I'm actually friends with a geneticist named Sophia Siedelberg, and her appearance proves that stereotypes about what intersex people even look like are just stereotypes. Thanks to certain books and talk show so-called experts, people think that all people with 5-alpha reductase live as men and are masculine, when Sophie Siedelberg looks and acts a bit like a nicer Debbie Harry from Blondie, who happens to be a genetics expert. And with CAH that I mentioned before, the stereotype is that people only identify as women. Actually, I know CAH people who identify across the board, including Shaman Raven Caldera, who identifies as a CAH guy. Some of this was demonstrated by Katie Couric and a whole panel of experts from across the intersex community and spectrum on a show National Geographic put out called The Gender Revolution. So I hope I've done some job of explaining what the heck intersex is and giving some examples. DawnMarie, how am I doing?
You're doing wonderful, yes.
So, okay, let me know when I should move on from what the heck is intersex to what the heck is the rights issues and such, or should I stick to, actually for 1 minute, as I said, non-binary factors into this because not all intersex people identify anyway. You can't say all intersex people are of a particular gender, sexual orientation, or identity. Many intersex people live as men, many live as women, many live as somewhere on the gender spectrum. Some identify as transgender, as well as intersex. Some identify as non-binary. Some use terms like rejected their birth assignment. Organization Intersex International founder Curtis Hinkle actually, if he didn't coin the phrase, he has sure put it more out into the world than anyone I have met. And it shows that biological sex and gender identity, neither one is as simple as people think. On the gender issues panel yesterday, it was said, it's complicated. I think that is the best takeaway two-word phrase for everything. Life is not as simple as people think. And people who are intersex, as well as people who are on the gender spectrum, have been around throughout history. The word chimera comes from Greek mythology for a mutant super beast that was a result of all sorts of matings. The old word for intersex, which is not as popular in the community these days, though some people do sometimes use it, hermaphrodite was the old word. From Greek mythology, Hermaphroditos, the in-between child of Hermes and Aphrodite. The point with that being that anyone who says all this stuff is new, not when the ancient Greeks, the ancient Sumerians, even the ancient Egyptians were talking about this. The pharaoh Akhenaten may have been intersex, and even such a mainstream crime writer as James Patterson documents this in his true crime book, The Murder of King Tut. So we've had people throughout history. We still have people here and now who are intersex. And yes? A question? If someone has a question, let me know.
Chanel just arrived. I did want to ask if you wanted to segue into the next section, or would you like to
No, I want Chanel to actually do a quick intro and talk about something that I'm a bit less versed in. Hello, Chanel? Is she unmuted, I hope?
Just a moment, and she'll get ready for that.
Good, because I think her intro factors into this section, because there are many physical realities and biological realities which there's a debate whether they fit in mainstream intersex or not, but wind up having the same characteristics as some types of intersex. Which is why I really wanted to have
Sorry about that. I needed to go to somewhere quiet. That was a little bit why I was late. I'm here now.
No problem. You're fine. We did the basic intro. What the heck is intersex? But I just mentioned that there are other biological realities that may not always be counted in the 46 or 47 types of intersex that the medical people recognize, which produce differences in reproductive and sex characteristics that I think should be understood as relating to all of this. So can you please introduce yourself and say something, if you don't mind?
Sure, no problem. So for those who have not met me, my name is Sean and I live in Los Angeles, California, more specifically East LA. That's beyond the point. I do a lot of stuff, but one of the most frustrating and random things that exist in my life and that I deal with that causes me a little bit of anguish here and there is the fact that I have PCOS. Now, I don't know if I have polycystic ovarian syndrome because my dad was exposed to Agent Orange or because my granddad was exposed to Agent Orange, but collectively, it just kind of didn't work out very well because every girl in my family line has this hormone altering condition that in a lot of people causes excessive hair growth to the point where basically when you see a bearded lady in a show about a circus, it's a good chance she has PCOS. I
Yeah.
I wish that I had the ability to like take some of the videos that I've seen recently in doing more research on people with this particular condition, PCOS, to show you guys that of people that cisgender women have full beards because of conditions such as this. Now, PCOS isn't the only intersex characteristic having condition that causes this, but it's the one that's most known for that. Because of the PCOS, people have things like insulin resistance and fructose resistance and hormone fluctuations and variations of the sort. A lot of girls in my family kind of wake up with a super deep voice because their hormones are like moving in that way in general. Sometimes PCOS is accompanied by a couple of different other conditions that leads the blood work on this sort of thing to go, huh? And get straight up confused. Why? Because intersex, as Cynthia probably said earlier, is the body not exactly reading one binary way or another. You have a mix of both in characteristic form. Usually people are talking about genitalia in that case, but not always. The blood work for a couple of my relatives literally comes back inconclusive because we have a lot of PCOS in our family. That's not the only type of condition that is a form of intersexness. I'm coming to grips with it recently, and it kind of sucks because, you know, depending on which type of the way your PCOS presents, you either have hyperfertility or infertility. And we've got both of those, and I think I'm infertile, so I'm having some issues right now. But I'm gonna slow down and stop talking and ask for questions because I need to breathe and also calm down a little. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. I prepped for this, but then time got away from me. Sorry.
No, I want to thank you for having. I've known you for several years, and I've been proud and impressed over the last year and a half that you've been coming forward on this, because we still live in a society where anything other than a body that can be read as just male, just female, still gets, at the very least, people going, huh? What the bleep? So I'm very proud of you.
Thank you, but I don't think that it's anything to be proud of. I'm just kind of in a weird place thinking about this because in looking at the way things are happening now with the news over and over and over with regard to the Olympics, essentially saying your hormone levels mean that you're not legally required to be counted as a woman for the purpose of saying playing sports is an issue for me because every child my sister has plays sports, and my middle niece, that would happen to her. Lots of kids that are intersex who are lucky enough to not have visible situations with their private areas might have other conditions with their like chromosomes or their blood work in regard to that that would flag a test. And it's not exactly the best thing that they should get ostracized for it. That's not something that happened to me because, you know, cisgender and completely cis passing, if you will.
That is one of the rights issues. Intersex people being able to compete at all in sports. Caster Semenya is still fighting, and we're not sure whether she will win or be kept from competing in sports ever again. Not everybody is noticed as intersex at birth. Some people are never noticed. And this thing with the Olympics is not a new issue, sadly. Okay, I'll give the quick history because we have so much of us as well to cover. It's the issue with intersex people being stigmatized in the Olympics started in the 1930s. Stella Walsh, Polish, I think she was a discus thrower. Her rivals threatened to blab some alleged knowledge that they could prove to get her kicked out. Her friends threatened to do the same thing to her detractors. She was allowed to compete, and she wasn't proved to be intersex until after her death decades later. In the 1950s and 60s, Cold War, that's when the hormone tests were instituted, and it was a clear Cold War, over-the-top reaction to the Cold War. Basically, I met feminist sports commentator C.L. Cole, and she gave a workshop on all this, where she quoted from government documents under Truman and Eisenhower, which actually had the phrase, "Those godless commies are going to sneak mutant super hermaphrodite athletes into our God-fearing women's sports," which if you unpack, that's everything of religious bias, everything of political over-the-topness, and gender bias, all in one nasty place. The East German women's swim team was all disqualified. The hormone and chromosome tests that they were given claimed they, quote, weren't real women. They were told that in those words. Yeah, every single one of them went home and got pregnant almost immediately after they left the Olympics. Caster Semenya was outed by the IAAF, International Association of Athletics Federations, I think, based on appearance profiling. Oh, she's too masculine appearing. Well, gee, somebody who's competing in sports, having huge muscle, I wonder why. And she was put through every invasive test they could, and they tried kicking her out. And unfortunately, unless somebody can throw an article at us today, I don't know what the heck her current fate of an athlete is. And there have been attempts by the Olympics to sterilize athletes like Edinancy Silva, who I think is a martial arts champion from, I think, Brazil. So this is still going on. And then we have all these horrible state legislatures trying to pass anti-human rights laws to mandate all these tests to prove the gender of young people, which is going to target all the people that Chanel was just talking about. That's one rights issue. Another rights issue is the right to simple bodily autonomy, reproductive potential. Too often, when an intersex baby is noticed to be genitally not looking exactly like what was expected, too often doctors have, and sadly still do in many places, perform unnecessary, non-consensual genital surgery just to make the kid fit arbitrary stereotypes of what a penis or clitoris should look like in terms of size and shape, when there's a range of such things. No one set of genitalia looks the same, even when it's people who fit what's expected of them. A friend of mine who's a paper worker in the medical field in the Midwest once said, when a doctor hears the word disorder, their first impulse is usually to fix it, usually with a knife. And that has too often been the fate of intersex babies and children, forcibly sterilized just to make them fit stereotypes. And some who probably don't want people like us being able to reproduce, which, no, that's not a thing. The Green Party opposes this. The United Nations opposes this. The UN has actually declared what's called intersex genital mutilation, or IGM, a bona fide form of torture. I actually spoke at the UN about this a year ago around this time, in fact. And whatever you think, good or bad, about Jill Stein, when she ran for president on our ticket in 2016, as a doctor, she demanded that other doctors join her in agreeing that intersex people have the bodily autonomy, in other words, the right to decide what happens to their bodies, including reproductive decisions, with fully informed consent, or else it's not, no, that's not going to happen. And I'm glad that our party has in our platform, in the, I believe it's in the sexual orientation and gender identity plank, that we support the bodily autonomy of intersex people of all ages to fully informed medical choice. And in fact, the beginning of the intersex rights movement in America, the Hermaphrodites with Attitude protest, was done around 1996 to shut down an American Academy of Pediatrics conference where their logic was to call intersex a social emergency, not medical, but social, and mandate immediate surgery. The people there were going to do forced surgery on an intersex baby on stage, and people massed outside that particular convention and did a giant protest that shut it down. And that was seen by many as the start of any big intersex rights movement in this country. It's just sad that we still have to keep fighting for these rights. There are so many other rights issues. I'll hit a couple of them quickly. The last national federal administration under Trump actually put in directives to Health and Human Services to say that sex was only male or female, and doctors weren't allowed to talk about anything else. I believe that was only rolled back in the wake of Bostock v. Clayton, basically saying that gender identity is at least protected in employment, and I believe there was a use of that to force this to be rolled back. Hate crimes, the same way that LGBT people are targets of hate crimes, so are intersex people, as young as 3 days old in one case. These are some serious issues, and people need to know about this so that people can advocate and be activists so that we can address and redress some of this. That's the rights issues, I think. At least the main ones I can think of right now.
Chanel Sack.
Hey, you're on the panel. Just say something, please.
One of the things that I know that we'd be capable of doing if we actually took the time to stop and think about it, to make things a little easier for people in certain medical predicaments, whether it be intersex people or disabled people or people under conservatorship in general, is kind of change the culture and narrative around speaking on these things. Yeah, I know in certain cases, certain cultures have, different beliefs around what an intersex child might mean, but focusing on this, turtle island that we're forced to call America, we can let it be known. And like I'm trying to see who said it in the chat, said, like Cindy said, let it be known that, the extent to which our party supports bodily autonomy. Like the thing that brings certain people into the youth caucus is knowing that this platform supports the rights and recognizes how much, for a lot of assigned male at birth people, they didn't get the option with regard to their circumcision, and now they're feeling some type of way about it because they would have liked to be asked. And I know that the similar situation occurs with intersex babies who are visibly intersexed. This party does a wonderful thing with this platform, even though our platform is very long and it's difficult to read all of it. It's one of those things, if we could help people to understand that it's better to give your child time to decide what works for them in terms of major surgery on their body, if we could change the culture as to how people regard these things, that would do a lot of good for so many people. Because I know a lot of what people end up coming up with when they have, gender variant intersex children, whatever you want to call them, they get have this fear associated with that because they don't know what it means for their child. And I know that that's the case with a lot of conditions because I'm a disabled person, and that fear that people have with regard to their babies is something that drives parents to do things that don't always make sense. If we could create a society that is safe for a child to just be, as long as they need to be, until they can use the words to say, this is the thing that I would like changed, or this is what I need to feel okay, that would do a lot more. Like, people in certain places be honor killing their children because they don't understand their bodies. And if we make a point of letting first of all, letting it be known what total bodily autonomy means, but also in addition to that, just like letting it be known that you don't have to fear what you don't always understand. That would do a lot, I think.
Oh yeah.
Over.
Exactly. That's the thing. Education on this. As I said yesterday on the other gender panel, that education is a key thing, that people know what the realities are. People know that they have real information. Because okay, poorly informed consent is not fully informed consent, nor is it even real consent. In terms of intersex, okay, heck, in terms of many biological realities, medical conditions, and such, unless it is actually threatening a child's life or some major function, if it isn't, the whole cliche, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, goes at least as much, if not more so. I mentioned Curtis Hinkle, a friend of mine, founder of organization Intersex International. He's intersex, and he was born with a life-threatening urinary blockage. He's happy they fixed the blockage so he was able to pee and not die in the maternity ward. He's not happy they tried messing around with other parts of his body just because those weren't standard. That's a major distinction that needs to be made, because too often doctors have told parents and families, this is going to really mess up your kid. No, people's attitudes might, but their biology is just going to be different and looking different. Too often, parents were told, "Oh, your kid's got a tumor," when it was really their gonads. Ovotestes exist. An ovotesty is a gonad that is in between ovary and testicle in one's organ. Too often, those have been removed just because they were there, just because they were different, with the claim of, oh, well, they're going to possibly become cancerous down the road. They don't take baby, they don't take babies who are assigned male at birth and who are non-intersex. They don't take their testicles out, nor do they do that on the ovaries of children assigned female at birth that aren't intersex. So this should not be done on intersex kids either. Informed consent. It has to be truly informed. The parents, the kid, everybody has to be told this is what the actual facts are. Nothing should be a lie. Nothing should be a scare tactic. I myself am a chimera. I was born with my siblings' digits on my feet. I had 6 digits. I'm still not sure whether I had fingers, thumbs, toes, what the heck they were. But a doctor lied to my parents and said, if we don't remove this right now, your kid will lose the ability to walk. And a parent will do anything to help save their kid misery, heartache, death, pain. They'd kill themselves. They'd jump off a cliff. They certainly would agree to what the doctor would say. And so I do not blame my parents for my body having been messed with and my bodily autonomy being violated. I blame the doctor who lied to them. And this is, I'm glad that the reality is changing, but it shouldn't have had to take all these decades. A year ago, I was on a panel about all this with AJ Reed and Margaret Elizabeth. Last year, I think it's Laurie's Children's Hospital in Illinois was still doing such horrible, unconsensual, unnecessary surgery. I'm happy to say that this statement is obsolete because they finally changed their policies on this within the past calendar year since the last A&M. The work is helping, particularly people just talking about our lives, talking to people, talking to parents, talking to young kids who don't know what to make of their bodies. Education is vital. So is informed consent.
Honestly, if we could get around to it, the next A&M, we should have a panel on consent, because that would be really useful. And I know that probably next year around SA Awareness Month, there's going to be a lot of content coming from the Youth Caucus on that, just to break that down, because there are
Which
different
month?
forms of.
Which month is that?
Uh, I want to say April, but I'm not 100% sure because I always get my awareness months mixed up because there are so many.
No, I just meant which awareness month. There are so many. I lose track.
Oh, sorry, Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Ah,
But yeah, it's just, this is one of those things where it doesn't have to be complicated or overly academic. As someone that deals with a lot of small children in large part because so many people in my family are babysitters, children understand so much more than you want to give them credit for at small ages. It's normal for small children to not be judging. They don't learn how to be judgmental and weird until they're older and taught by their parents.
or other people around them. And I'll say, quick story. As I said, I lost an entire toe or finger off each foot because a doctor violated my consent and autonomy. I saved a child from that. Kid might be a chimera or might not, because polydactyly, having more than 5 fingers or toes, can either be from having certain recessive genes pop up or from being a chimera. At any rate, my brother's an art teacher, mentioned that yesterday, I think. One of his colleagues had her 2-year-old, I think, who was verbal enough to say a couple things, though only about as much as a 2-year-old. Point is, kid had an 11th toe, and the parents' way of dealing with it was to tell everybody, hey, that's their lucky toe, like Nemo's lucky fin, and the mother was being pressured by people. Maybe you should have something done about that. And I jumped across my brother's lawn and said, took my shoes off, showed where each toe or finger used to be on me, and said, no, please let your kid have the chance to make that decision for themselves so they don't have to go through any what I did. And I'm so glad that that mother said, wow, I'm going to have to definitely let my kid decide. That's the point of this. You can talk about this in, relatively simple, easy terms. Simply that this is what your body is, and there's nothing wrong with that. That alone is powerful as heck. And other cultures throughout history, I can think of some where some cultures, intersex people were seen as scary, others were revered, others were seen as just, hey, it happens. Diné culture, I think, what people used to call Navajo. I hear the story of the Nadle, the in-between people who taught the rest of the human race art and culture and farming and science and medicine. And when men and women went into a sex-segregated civil war across the Great River, were the only people who saw, holy crap, the river's flooding. We got to get people into boats. And they managed to persuade everybody who were fighting to get into the one boat that was left because they hadn't finished the second one. We have stories like this throughout history. And not all cultures were as uptight about this as the medical establishment until recent decades has been. That actually is largely the fault of John Money, a pretty nasty sexologist who had biases against women, biases against transgender women, who took a young man who later renamed himself David Reimer, whose penis has been damaged in botched circumcision. Money chose him to inflict his messed up theory about being able to brainwash a child to fit another gender by experimenting on Reimer, trying to force him to live as a girl, trying to force him onto hormone treatment, and wanted to do other surgeries in addition to having removed Reimer's gonads. This so-called John Joan experiment was hailed, even by feminists, as a success story. No, Reimer was miserable living as a girl. He rebelled against money, went back to living as male, and sadly, along with his twin brother, they took their own lives in the middle 2000s, which shows that doing this kind of experimentation doesn't cause anything but harm. And again, back to basic informed consent and medical ethics as a major rights point for us. I mean, even in the sideshows, intersex people were treated with at least some dignity. Chanel mentioned the bearded ladies who were in many sideshows. You had chimeras who had a, quote, extra arm or leg, and they actually usually did performances. I'm a bit of a sideshow historian as one of my more interesting hobbies, so I've looked up some of this. throughout history, we've had people, and throughout history, people mostly have been allowed to live and let live, at least for the most part. So we've had so many other bad things that have happened, which is why we've had to have rights movements, why we've had to insert stuff into our platform as a party so we can be on the forefront of these rights issues.
Our
Intersex
platform,
Awareness Day is the anniversary of the Hermaphrodites with Attitude protest, October 26th. Intersex Solidarity Day is November 8th, Herculean Barban's birthday. Quick one-sentence story. That was an intersex person living in Victorian times who was outed to the medical community and whose life was short and tragic, but who did a lot to raise awareness on this, particularly through a diary which has been published in the 1980s. Sorry if I accidentally stepped on something.
no, you're good. I'm just gonna take a second to remember where I was going with that.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'll forgot. I forgot it. It'll come back to me.
Well, I was talking about the rights issues, about the stuff with David Reimer, about the need to raise awareness about a lot of these stories have been sad over the decades. Point is, we need to know them so that we can make things better.
That much is true. And I must say it's helpful to see more materials coming out, about ways to explain more clearly things like what the definition of intersex is, but also more about, the misconceptions that exist. It's a situation where for most people that are intersex, and I could be incorrect, but for most people that are intersex, you can't tell either because they were non-consensually surgerized at birth or because they're like me and the only way to tell that they're intersex is to run a blood test or a CT scan of their reproductive area.
Yeah, not everybody's noticed. Many people notice at birth, and unfortunately, many of these kids and babies have to, as I said, be protected from forced sterilization and genital mutilation. But a lot of people just aren't noticed. I was assigned male at birth. I was assumed to be a guy. I was raised a boy by a loving, well-meaning family who were told that. Then I had puberty number 2 in my 20s, and let's just say me and my first girlfriend sure as hell were surprised. And that's a story that I've heard from a lot of other people.
With a lot of people, it's you don't know that you might have something like CAH or something until like post puberty in most otherwise girls, because the CAH that started popping up in my family didn't pop up until people were like 17, 16, etc. I don't know how I'm not sure how prevalent it is across different demographics, but my family is kind of an oddball in this way.
I wish I'd thought to bring up any of the statistics on any of the various types of intersex, but that could be looked up and thrown into websites, chats, and things later. And the interesting thing is polycystic ovarian syndrome and congenital adrenal hyperplasia, while they are different medical things, they have different features. People with one can sometimes look like people with the other. I
Yeah,
mentioned one, Raven
PCOS.
Caldera. He had CAH. I put him next to a friend with PCOS. They looked exactly alike.
Yeah, sometimes they're comorbid because that's the situation with my niece. She has PCOS and CAH. Um, the biggest thing here goes back to something that I is cliche to say, but I'm gonna say it because it is appropriate, is the whole notion of like not judging a book by its cover. You cannot know by looking at someone what's going on with them bodily. So, like, be decent is all I'm saying. Are there any like other questions just before I forget? I know there's time for questions later, but I wanted to make sure I was making sense. Over.
No, you're making perfect sense. I wanted to throw out three quick things before we get to that. People might wonder what place this has in politics besides what we've already mentioned, besides the personal being political. Well, obviously, we're in the Green Party. We have rules and things in place that we are to be on the forefront of this, of these rights issues. But this goes back even to a couple hundred years ago. American Revolution. We just had July 4th and all that hoo-ha. How about the fact that George Washington and Casimir Pulaski were both intersex? They're trying to decide which type of intersex Pulaski had. As for Washington, that's depending on which set of experts, he either had a second X chromosome or a second Y chromosome. In each case, either Klinefelter's XXY or XYY. Most people don't know the karyotypes, chromosome counts, and all that unless they've had medical testing. In each case, it backs up the fact that Washington was so tall and thin. And the one the one political story I'll bring up before we break for everything else is my favorite World War II hero that nobody talks about unless they've heard of them, Fiore de Henriquez, artist, sculptor. Their bronze statues of horses fetch like huge amounts of money. They fought as one of the Italian partisans, i.e. the Italians who wanted to kick Mussolini's butt and take the fascists out of Italy. Henriquez also saved a lot of Jews from the Nazis, was sentenced to death by the SS, made a daring escape out a second-story bathroom window, and escaped to Allied Europe and America, living as an artist until dying in their middle 80s, maybe a bit under 20 years ago. So we've had people in political struggles, rights work, and just history. So this is not a case of people being rare. This is not a case of people not having a place in history, politics, and particularly in the Green Party, because or else why would I be here talking about this and why would you all be here listening to it? So we do understand that these are issues that the Green Party cares about because they fit into our pillars, our values, and our platform. So I'll hand this back to Chanel then.
I don't really know how to end more than what you've already said. You came through with the history as you always do. This is a newer journey for me. And it's one of those things where I know that our party is going to end up on the right side of most things with this, because at the end of the day, this platform, this Tinky Values exist, to protect people from having a situation where their livelihood is questioned and threatened because of something that they can't control. Ending stigma around intersex presentation and existence would help people you've never met. And I think that's most of what the Green Party exists to do politically, educationally, to create policy and platforms and a world that makes it so people you've never met don't have to struggle or suffer. At least that's how I understand it. It's part of the reason I'm here. If I'm wrong, someone can correct me at any time. Thank you.
Hey, that's why I joined the Green Party. I joined the Green Party for a couple reasons. To have an alternative to red or blue, to help fix the environment. I live next to a nuclear disaster site, so I don't trust our water. And so I can be in a political party that cares about people like me, intersex, transgender, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and is actually willing to affirm us and protect us from a world that really needs help. I'm wondering, do we got questions, comments? I kind of don't check my watch during these because I think it rude, so let me know how much time we got.
We're at 5:57, and so yes, definitely. Are there any questions?
I hear someone?
I just want to thank you all for speaking so boldly on this topic. I don't think it's addressed by the major parties out there, and that would make the Green Party unique. And it needs to be, I think, put out there more, because there's a lot of people, like you say, don't know that there's a party that would support their right to bodily autonomy. And I just don't think we can sell that enough. That's just my personal opinion. But thank you both for speaking. It's been very informative.
You're welcome. And yeah, that is what the Green Party, we are unique, because I haven't seen a blessed thing from the blue or red parties on this. I don't think intersex has been mentioned by any POTUS candidate except Greens, like in 2016. If anyone can find me anything else, DawnMarie, if you can throw my email up, I would love to hear from people after we're done today, particularly if you got anything that I didn't know about or didn't cover. I want to hear it, please. Other questions, comments?
Hello. My name is Michael. I'm from Illinois. And I just wanted to thank you for speaking out today. And, you know, I didn't really know much about intersex, but I've really learned a lot and I really appreciate it. So I wanted to thank you.
You're welcome. I know it's why I do talks on this kind of stuff, so people know more about the subject, so they would be better toward each other, better toward intersex people they know, toward intersex people they don't know.
I'm just glad to be helpful where I can. But oof, this realization was a difficult thing for me, happening kind of all in the course of like a good 9 months or so. I think it kind of hit the fan when, remember like 4 months ago when I was talking to you, we were on the phone and then I just had a horrible bit of pain and I had to go because like I was too dizzy because of the other stuff that was happening. You remember?
Yeah,
It was
you
soon
worried
after
me.
that. It was like I had to look into this because stuff was not making sense. So for me, it's like I think it comes from a place because of the fact that I was raised around and born with the disability. So I have to look at the world from a you can't judge somebody by what they can't control. And just because someone is different from you does not necessarily mean that they are incapable in some way. And I think one of the things is parents, they want to fix imperfections in their children just to make it easier for them.
You've also had a lot quicker realization about a lot of the stuff. I mean, I'm here talking to people after having talked about it for 20 something years, but even for me, some of it has been kind of quick and sudden. Let's see, I'll be 45 in September. I had my second puberty in my early to middle 20s, and I finally realized, okay, I guess that's intersex, especially since I grew breasts bigger than half the girls I dated in college. But that I already had figured out by the last couple decades. Then to find out pretty much just by having certain dear friends look at my body when we were undressing to realize, okay, Chimera, this likely fits. How the heck I have a body that's that in between and has asymmetries all over. My upper right and lower left make more of a comparison with the areas of my body than upper right and upper left. If you look at my face, you'll notice, okay, that's why her face looks like that, because apparently we're talking the heads of two kids merged. I've always wondered why I have almost no rhythm with music time. That's because I'm apparently using arms from two different bodies. I figured this out 5 years ago, and it's still kicking my butt here and there. And in Chanel's case, you've talked about Agent Orange in your family. While chimerism does result just naturally because pregnancy is a weird time for baby as well as mama, or babies as well as mama, or per pregnant person carrying them. Well, there's a likelihood that in my case, it was the result of exposure to DES, which I wish I could pronounce the darn name of that. It was a synthetic estrogen, which sadly was used to torture gay codebreaker Alan Turing to try to change his sexual orientation after World War II, but was also given to pregnant people as a snake oil thing to fix everything from morning sickness to miscarriages. Instead, it causes things like incomplete twinning, where in my case, I joke, I want to wear a white picket fence themed dress because I am 2.3 kids. Stuff like this is a hard thing for people to realize if they haven't been, raised with knowledge of this, which is why I want people to have this in all the things on human sexuality, reproduction, all the stuff for the whole what they expect when you're expecting genre of stuff, so that people know, okay, this might be how your kids turn out, so that you can talk to them and they're not growing up in isolation on this like I did, and the kind of stuff Chanel describes.
I think that a lot of things could be improved if we were able to get some of that profit motive out of healthcare, or specifically out of healthcare research, so that when people did research to see the longitudinal studies on various forms of intersectedness, I don't know, intersextedness, I don't know what the right
Actually, there are two words that are used: intersex, just in itself, and intersexuality. In fact, Organization Intersex International in French is Organisation Internationale Intersexualité. My French accent has been described as a New York construction worker trying to speak French, but there you have it.
Yeah, because I mean, part of an issue across medical fields right now is that research for things that are lesser known, like like cerebral palsy or spina bifida or intersexedness. I'm gonna say the wrong word multiple times because I
You're
have a hard time
fine.
with the word. Are
We're all
not
learning. It's fine.
are not done. Like for certain disabilities, for instance, they stopped studying us when we got out of high school. And I don't know if the same holds true for intersex children. In large part because most of the sample size that I see where they check to see what other sorts of comorbid health conditions or correlated conditions.
Comorbidities, they call it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Exist because the sample sizes are very small. I know that they have a tendency to say that certain things are rare. And yeah, certain things are rare, but intersex people are only about as rare as people with red hair. And you see a lot of redheads. So, like I said before, just because you can't see it doesn't mean we don't exist.
Oh yeah, the redhead statistic, which is one statistic. So when I did the portion right before you came in, as I said, I know researcher Robin Wood, and her 20-year-old research says that 1 out of every 10 people is likely intersex if you lump in all the genital, hormonal, and chromosomal stuff instead of just separating it out as this person has this type and that person has that type. Just, okay, everybody who might in any way at all be on this, get on in here. It's 7 to 10% as of 20 years ago. And in terms of disability stuff, my eye contact is all over the place because I have a visual disability. It's been diagnosed as retinitis pigmentosa in the past 20 years after going to lots of doctors. And that's considered a rare one. And research on that has been kind of on the fringe. So I certainly agree with what Chanel says on that.
If there's no profit, for-profit healthcare, for-profit pharmaceuticals are not going to look into it. They just don't see any money. I was reading something the other day about this one drug that probably less than 500 Americans take, And worldwide, it's probably less than 5,000 people. But they're just going to stop making it now. That keeps these people alive because it's such a rare genetic condition. So if it's not profitable, yeah, they just give it up and move to the next profitable things. That's why opium is so profitable. It's so easy because you can give it to everybody, hook them on it. But yeah, that's why for-profit healthcare is so terrible. It doesn't address actual needs of people. It just addresses bottom lines, I guess you could say.
You could say
And there
that
has
again to a certain extent, but chronic pain patient isn't going to say that all opioids are bad, but there definitely needs to be a better understanding of how certain things work. Because I know for certain forms of like certain conditions, the only thing that works might be an opioid. But if there wasn't a for-profit motive in a lot of things, particularly oil and healthcare and health insurance, people would be in a much better place because, if there wasn't a for-profit motive in imprisoning people, for instance, when people developed addictions because of the socioeconomic nonsense that capitalism puts us through, they would treat that like the health problem that it is, and people would not be put in jail because they could not get treatment for something and they needed to keep getting treatment for it because what actually made them not have pain anymore was no longer available or no longer affordable. To get a little bit back on topic for a tiny bit is there is another issue with regard to how intersex people sometimes have other conditions that happen not necessarily related to our gonads, but in reference because of how things happen. Like people with PCOS, for instance, tend to be at higher risk for non-fatty liver disease, among other things, and like sometimes IBS, depending on the condition. It's fascinating. I don't like having to study these things, but I want to make sense of myself. So when I need to make sense of myself, I find a book or a database so I can find points on a data chart to know that I'm going to be all right. I don't know. It's probably like a really bad coping mechanism that I need to not do, but I can't be the only one that does that, right?
I am floored by the fact of what you just said. If you took out the modern references, the data, and internet, is almost word for word what Herculine Barban says about herself in her memoirs. The
I
Michel
know that
Foucault
people are never going to
translation.
make sense, but we can love them anyway.
Could you repeat that? Because I think it needs repeating.
I was just saying, I know that people are not always going to make sense, but we need to try to love them anyway.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be hard to love somebody just because you don't know what's going on inside their body or what parts that you're not supposed to see look like.
I can
Like,
think of a quick thing of that one of my friends said. I have a dear friend in Michigan who has 4 kids, and they've all known me. 2 of the kids before I moved back here, the other 2 I hope to meet when I go back there to visit. And the oldest was told in front of class by a classmate back when they were like at the end of elementary school, beginning junior high. Everybody's just male or female, and nobody's both. And my friend's kid said, I know Miss Cynthia, and she's both. So this kind of education can be done. People can talk to their kids honestly. People should be able to have their doctors talk with them honestly. This is what it's all about. As I said on the one about being respectful about people's gender stuff, it goes back to respect and honoring people's basic personhood. We got any other questions, comments?
We have 8 minutes left. Is there anybody who has a question or a comment?
particularly if I've left anything out, if I've left anything kind of technical or vague, please let me know. I know there's a lot of information we covered today. Did you put my email up so people can write me after this?
Yeah, it's in the chat. Do you want me to put it in there again?
If people haven't seen it, I don't know how that whole chat thing works. I use a screen reader for everything, so I don't know that.
Well, it's definitely in the chat, and people who want it have it by now. So, I mean,
All right.
if
But yeah,
you
since we're
thought
coming
of
to the
human
end of,
Shirley, we can.
since we're coming to the end, like we said, anyone wants to ask or say anything, well, we got a few minutes left. I want to thank Chanel for being on this panel. I want to thank DawnMarie for doing all the technical stuff to make sure that all the technical things worked.
I
I
do
want
what
to
I
thank
can.
all the
I just
folks
did not
coming out
realize
here.
that I was late because the Eastern time versus Pacific time thing was throwing off my whole brain. And my dad popped up. He surprised me, so it threw off a little bit of my weekend. But my dad, so I'm
I
not
still
gonna.
want to thank you folks for what I just thanked you for, and I want to thank everyone who came to watch and listen to this, for coming out, showing up, having some really good comments and questions. And if we got a couple minutes, and if there's any left, go ahead.
I'm sorry that I was late. I hope I contributed enough to make up for it.
Yes, you did. My friends ask obvious questions. Gotta love them. There's a lot that I was able to cover, but the stuff that you can cover, nah, you did an excellent job on stuff that is not my experience, and people need to hear about as well.
We try. It's it's hard because a lot of people aren't used to people speaking up so loudly on issues such as this, because I think that they thought, because of the supposed rarity of certain versions of gender variance, or sex variance in this case, that it was never going to be them knowing someone who was intersex. So
That's
it's
the thing on
kind of
chimeras.
like,
Like,
yeah.
okay, with chimeras, Today's show did everyone a disservice by saying that they only knew of one, the one they had on. When I was looking this stuff up for the first time, some whack website claimed, oh, there are only 30 chimeras on planet Earth in terms of live human people who are chimeras. Baloney. I have that many on my Facebook friends.
Mm.
And that's in the absence of me getting off my butt to make a Facebook group for chimera people. I just stumble across people, sometimes literally. So that's another takeaway, is that none of this stuff is as rare, air quotes, as people think. All the rights issues do affect people's rights in general, particularly because not everybody knows if you're intersex. Most people might get some blood work that brings up their hormones at their doctor, but not to the extent that, like you've described, Chanel. Not everybody knows their chromosomes unless they've competed in sports because of the unfortunateness of the Olympics, or they've had some medical need. So no, a lot of intersex people are noticed, but a lot aren't. So a colleague of mine jokes, good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between. That is us on this panel, and that might be you too. And I see some wisdom in what he says when he does that. Again, people don't know what they are. I know that I was intersex until 2 puberties later. So this is something that people should be talking about. And these are rights issues that the Green Party is already at the forefront of, but we need to be more on the forefront of by continuing to do the work, continuing to demand that the medical establishment stop messing with intersex babies and kids, by insisting that people's rights be covered, by opposing laws that are going to stigmatize and mess with particularly young people's right to be themselves. This is all green values. It falls under our pillars, our values, and our platform. So I say, let's keep walking that talk.
I feel like that's a good moment to end on. I really do. Not just because my phone's at 5%, but also because we only got 30 minutes and it seems like that there is not much questions to be given in that time.
30
So
minutes or 30 seconds?
3 minutes.
Oh,
But I
3
think
minutes.
it's safe to, well, 2 minutes now, but I think it's safe to end. Thank you guys for being here tonight.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us. This has been
Of
an
course.
interesting online convention. I
Thank
wish
you
I had
folks
more
for having
time this
us.
week. So see y'all later, I hope.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks. You too.